What happens when a seemingly simple flight turns into the center of attention for Barron Trump? An ordinary journey descends into chaos, and no one expects that the real storm only begins when Melania arrives. The crackling intercom blared through the bustling terminal of Dallas Love Field Airport, announcing the final boarding call for passengers. Near gate C-12, 17-year-old Barron Trump sat on a chair that seemed too small for his tall frame. He hunched over, scrolling through his phone, trying to blend in with the hurried crowd preparing for their flight. At 17, Barron's life had never been normal, but he had mastered the art of blending into public spaces, a necessity with the Trump name. However, today, that effort was about to face an unforeseen challenge. A gate agent, an older man with a sharp face and an impatient demeanor, approached the priority boarding area. His gaze landed on Barron, who was standing in the first-class passenger line. Something about the young man's calm, detached demeanor irked him. With a voice that cut through the surrounding noise, the agent spoke up. "Excuse me, young man, are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" Barron looked up, slightly startled but maintaining his composure. "Yes, I have a first-class ticket," he replied, his tone even and polite, reflecting his upbringing. The agent glanced at the phone in Barron's hand, then at the simple hoodie and sneakers he was wearing. "May I see your ticket?" Barron hesitated briefly. This wasn't the first time he had been singled out for no reason, but the man's aggressive tone made him uneasy. He handed over his boarding pass, which clearly displayed the name Barron Trump. The agent read the name aloud, pausing, his expression flickering. But instead of backing off, he said with a stern attitude, "Wait here." The surrounding passengers began to notice, curious whispers spreading through the crowd. Barron felt his cheeks flush, but he maintained his outward calm. A few minutes later, the agent returned with a supervisor. "There's an issue with your ticket," the agent stated. "You need to step aside so we can handle this." Barron frowned. "What issue? I booked this ticket weeks ago." The supervisor interjected. "We're sorting it out, sir. Please step away from the gate." Reluctantly, Barron stepped aside, acutely aware of the stares from other passengers. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The murmurs grew louder, frustration rising within him, but he clenched his teeth, trying not to let things spiral out of control. But the situation didn't ease, it was only just beginning. Barron leaned against a nearby column, his eyes following the other passengers boarding without any trouble. The glances from the gate agent and the murmurs from the crowd grew heavier with each passing second. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his mind racing with questions. Why is this taking so long? Is it because of my last name, or something completely different? Barron wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but this was starting to feel like a personal attack. After a few minutes, the supervisor returned, his face still as stern as before. "We can't verify your identity through the system," he said, his tone rigid. "Do you have any other identification?" Barron frowned, frustration creeping into his voice. "My passport is in my carry-on. You haven't even checked it." The supervisor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Barron's reasonable response. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Sir, it's not just that. We have procedures to follow." "Procedures?" Barron asked, his tone calm but tinged with skepticism. "What procedures? I've flown through this airport dozens of times without any issues." The gate agent from earlier interjected, his tone defensive. "We've had some anomalies recently. You're not being targeted." But his eyes betrayed his words. Barron didn't believe it, and neither did a few nearby passengers. They began muttering to each other. A woman in her 40s, holding a child on her hip, spoke up. "What's the problem? He's just a kid. If he has a ticket, let him board." The supervisor ignored her, focusing on Barron. "You'll have to wait here while we conduct further assessments. If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate the matter." "Escalate?" Barron repeated, his patience wearing thin. "Escalate what exactly? I haven't done anything wrong." As if on cue, a pair of airport security officers appeared, flanking Barron. His chest tightened, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief at how quickly things were spiraling. Their presence drew even more attention. Phones were raised, recording every second of the unfolding scene. "Sir, please come with us," one officer said evenly. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Barron exhaled, his jaw clenching as he grabbed his carry-on. "Fine," he said, his voice restrained. He followed them into a small, sterile room near the gate. The whispers and camera flashes from the crowd trailed behind him like a storm cloud. Inside, the officers directed him to sit at a cold table. The air grew heavier as one officer began flipping through his passport. "This is ridiculous," Barron muttered, shaking his head. One of the officers looked up. "We're just following protocol, son." But the word protocol was starting to sound like an excuse for something more sinister. The more they questioned him, the more Barron felt the weight of an unspoken bias in the room. But what Barron didn't know was that someone else was on the way, and she was not pleased. Sitting in the back seat of a black SUV weaving through Dallas traffic, Melania Trump held her phone in her hand, her eyes focused on the screen. She had planned a quick trip to surprise her son, Barron, at the airport after his flight. But as her phone buzzed with a series of text messages and social media alerts, her expression shifted from calm to worried. One message in particular caught her attention. "Something's happening with Barron at the airport. People are posting videos." Her fingers swiped across the screen, pulling up a short clip showing Barron surrounded by security and being led away from the gate. She replayed the footage twice, her brows furrowing deeper with each view. "Driver, please hurry," she said, her voice calm but firm, carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, at the airport, Barron sat in a small room, his gaze fixed on the blank wall in front of him. The officers had left to verify information, leaving him alone in the stifling silence. He didn't know who to call or what to do next. His hands rested on the table, fingers tapping lightly in a rhythm he wasn't even aware of. Suddenly, the door swung open, and the supervisor from earlier stepped in. "We're still working on clarifying the situation," he said, avoiding eye contact. "It won't be much longer." Barron frowned, his tone sharp. "How much longer? You've had all my information for nearly an hour." The supervisor hesitated, mumbling something about procedures before hastily retreating. Barron sighed in frustration, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't just about a ticket or ID anymore. There was a deeper feeling, as if he was being unfairly targeted for an unspoken reason. Outside the terminal, Melania's SUV pulled up to the curb. She stepped out with a commanding presence, even in her simple attire. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished floor as she strode through the airport, drawing every eye. She didn't need to announce her arrival. People instinctively moved aside as she approached the gate where the incident had occurred. Passengers recognized her immediately, whispering among themselves, some pointing toward the area where security had taken Barron. "Excuse me," she said to a nearby airline employee. "Where is my son?" The employee blinked, stunned by the direct question. "Ma'am, let me check." But Melania didn't wait. She moved forward, her eyes scanning the terminal for any sign of Barron. When she spotted the small room where he was being held, she quickened her pace. She reached the door just as two officers were stepping out. They froze upon seeing her, their expressions a mix of surprise and apprehension. "What is going on here?" Melania asked, her voice calm but carrying a weight that demanded an immediate answer. "Mrs. Trump," one officer began, fumbling for words, "this is just standard protocol." "Protocol?" She cut in, her gaze icy. "You're holding my son in a small room with no explanation. What kind of protocol is that?" The supervisor appeared behind her, his face pale. "Mrs. Trump, it's all a misunderstanding. We're trying to verify his ticket." "A misunderstanding?" Melania's voice remained calm, but sharper now. "Do you treat all passengers this way, or just the ones you decide to single out?" The room fell silent, the tension so thick it felt like time had stopped. But this silence wouldn't last. Melania was about to demand answers they couldn't provide. Her gaze didn't waver as she stood in the doorway, her presence making the entire room shift. Barron glanced at his mother, a flicker of relief crossing his face but still restrained. He sat up straighter, his shoulders no longer slumped. "Mrs. Trump," the supervisor stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Please understand, we're just trying to make sure everything is in order." "This is not in order," Melania interrupted, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You have his ticket, his passport, and his name. What more do you need? A handwritten invitation to board the plane?" The supervisor flinched but tried to regain his composure. His name was flagged in the system, and that requires additional checks." Melania tilted her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Flagged because he's my son, Or because someone decided he didn't belong in first class today? The officers exchanged nervous glances, none daring to speak. The tension was palpable, and everyone in the room could feel it. Finally, one officer cleared his throat. "It's standard procedure, ma'am. We didn't know about his relation to you until just now." Melania narrowed her eyes. "So this is about his last name." The supervisor opened his mouth to protest, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Save your excuses. I want to speak to whoever is in charge right now." The man hesitated but eventually nodded and stepped out of the room to make a call. Melania turned to Barron, her expression softening as she approached him. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Barron nodded, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Yes, I'm fine. They're just wasting my time." Melania gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then turned back to face the officers. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her voice even and calm. "You've humiliated my son in front of dozens of people. This isn't about protocol or procedures. It's about respect, or rather, the lack of it." One officer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Trump, we'll make it right. We'll ensure your son gets on the next flight." "You think this is about getting on a flight?" Melania interrupted, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "This is about accountability. I don't want whispered apologies behind closed doors. I want them where they belong, out there, where this started." The supervisor returned with a higher-ranking airport official. The official extended his hand, but Melania deliberately ignored it. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding," he began. "I assure you we'll review the incident and take appropriate action." "Appropriate action?" Melania repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Does that include addressing the staff who escalated this without cause, or reviewing the footage that shows exactly how this started?" The official paled. "We can certainly pull up the footage, ma'am." "Do it," Melania said firmly, "and do it now." The room seemed to shrink as everyone waited. A few minutes later, the supervisor returned with a laptop. The grainy footage showed Barron sitting quietly at the gate before being approached unreasonably by the agent. It captured the entire exchange, from the unnecessary questions to the escalation that led to Barron being led away. Melania watched in silence, her face betraying no emotion. When the footage ended, she turned to the supervisor. "You owe my son a public apology." "Of course," the man stammered. "We'll take care of it right away." But Melania wasn't done. "This isn't just about an apology. This is about sending a message that no one should be subjected to this kind of treatment, regardless of their name or status." The supervisor, now visibly trembling, led the way back to the boarding gate. Melania walked beside him, her stride steady and purposeful, with Barron following closely behind. The tension in the terminal was almost tangible. The passengers who had witnessed the earlier commotion were still curious, stirred by the sudden return of the teenager and his mother. As they reached the gate, the supervisor took a deep breath, preparing to face the crowd and the apology he knew was unavoidable. But what happened next would not just be an apology. It would be a lesson in respect and accountability, one that no one in that terminal would forget. The supervisor stepped forward, clearing his throat slightly to draw the crowd's attention toward him. His voice trembled a bit, but he tried to speak slowly, each word emphasized as if to etch it into everyone's minds. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I would like to take a moment to address an incident that occurred this morning. A misunderstanding involving our passenger, Mr. Barron Trump, led to actions that were misguided and inappropriate." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. A few surprised glances were exchanged, while others nodded slightly, as if they had already guessed part of the story. The supervisor glanced briefly at Melania, her stern gaze seeming to give him the courage to continue. "I want to make it clear," he continued, his voice now stronger, "that this young man is entirely blameless. The fault lies with us, and we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience and distress caused." Barron stood still beside him, his hands deep in his pockets, his face betraying no emotion. But deep inside, he felt the weight of this moment, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been treated unfairly in public. Melania stepped forward, her dignified presence immediately drawing all eyes to her. "I appreciate your words," she began, her voice calm yet commanding. "But words alone are not enough. This isn't just about my son. It's about a larger principle, treating every individual with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The gate area fell silent, her words cutting through the air like a blade. My son may carry a prominent name, but first and foremost, he is a human being, a young man who deserves to be treated fairly, just like anyone else in this airport. She paused, her gaze slowly sweeping across the crowd, as if delivering a message to each person individually. Let this moment serve as a reminder to pause before acting, to remember that respect doesn't come from fame or status, but from our shared humanity. The crowd erupted into applause. A few people stood up, showing their strong agreement. The supervisor bowed his head, his face flushed with embarrassment. In that moment, the airport terminal seemed filled with a new energy, not of criticism or division, but of empathy and connection. As the applause died down, a young woman, holding a toddler in her arms, timidly approached Barron and Melania. I just wanted to say, she spoke softly, I'm so sorry for what you both went through. It wasn't fair. Melania responded with a gentle smile, her eyes warm. Thank you. That means a lot, she replied. Barron nodded slightly, quiet gratitude welling up inside him, though he was still trying to process everything that had just happened. But this moment of awakening was not the end. It was the beginning of a broader conversation about respect, about fairness, and about accountability, a wave of reflection that would spread far beyond the cold walls of the terminal, touching the corners of society. As the gate area gradually settled, Barron and Melania were escorted to the lounge to wait for the next flight. The airline staff, now seemingly walking on eggshells, tried their best to make amends. They brought snacks and offered priority boarding, but Melania merely waved them off, her eyes flashing with resolve. For her, it wasn't about compensation. It was about a greater principle, respect. Barron sat across from his mother, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his gaze seemingly lost in an undefined space. After a moment of silence, he broke the air. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. Melania looked up from her phone, her expression softening slightly. You handled it very well, she said, her voice filled with pride. Staying calm in situations like that isn't easy. Barron shrugged, a faint smile crossing his lips. I'm used to this kind of thing. It's just that this time, it was too public. Melania leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her eyes becoming serious. And that's exactly the problem, she said slowly. No one should have to get used to being treated unfairly, whether it's you, me, or anyone else. Respect should never be determined by a name or appearance. Barron nodded, his mother's words sinking deep into his mind. He asked softly, Do you think they'll change anything after this? Melania tilted her head, pondering for a moment. Maybe not today, she replied. But moments like this add up. People will notice, and sometimes it just takes one person standing up to make others think twice before acting. While waiting, Melania took out her phone and began typing. Just a few minutes later, a tweet appeared on her personal page. Today, my son experienced something no one should have to endure, being judged before being understood. This is a reminder that we need to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Respect is universal. Let's do better. The post quickly went viral, sparking heated discussions on social media about bias, accountability, and how we treat others in public spaces. Barron scrolled through the comments, some supportive, some critical, but most agreed that fairness and dignity are non-negotiable values. When it was time to board, Barron and Melania walked together to the gate. The staff, now more attentive than ever, guided them without any mistakes. Once settled in their seats, Melania glanced at her son. Barron was wearing headphones, his gaze directed out the window. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with deep thoughts. This wasn't just about Barron. It was about everyone who has ever felt small, overlooked, or unworthy. Moments like this are opportunities to teach, to push for change, and to remind the world that respect isn't a privilege, it's a fundamental right. As the plane taxied down the runway, Melania closed her eyes, her mind replaying the day's events. It hadn't been an easy experience, but she hoped it would leave a lasting impact, not just on those involved, but on everyone who heard the story. Because sometimes, the most profound lessons are learned through adversity. How we respond can inspire others to rise above prejudice and spread kindness. If this story touched you, share it with those who might need a reminder of the value of respect and fairness. Let's make a difference together through every conversation, every small action. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to discover more inspiring stories that provoke thought and change.